I'm Simon Melov, co-founder and CEO of Gerostate Alpha, and we make drugs for aging. Now, I realize that's a pretty bold claim, but I'm going to give you some information which will help you decide how much credibility you can give to that claim. So, spoiler alert, I'm Australian. I grew up in Australia, and that's where the accent comes from. You know, as a child growing up, I don't really recall meeting too many older individuals or even thinking about it too much at all, to be honest. My parents were professionals. My father was a medical doctor, and we grew up in suburbia in South Sydney. Now, my maternal grandparents were English, and they came over to visit when I was a very small boy. And that gave rise to something which actually helped shape my entire life. And I'm going to tell you exactly what that was. So I was washing dishes with my grandmother in the sink, with our hands both in the dishwater at the same time. And I remember looking at my young hands and my grandmother's hands at the same time, thinking, why are they so different? What is the difference between my hands, who were about 6 to 8 years old, and my grandmother's hands, who was in her 60s? And this was really puzzling to me. And I remember looking up at her face and thinking with a real shock, she is really different than my my parents or other people who I routinely came in contact with. So I went to my father and I asked my father, Dad, what is it about getting older which makes all these changes happen? What is it? What is this thing called aging? And he said, well, that's a biological question. And I said, well, how do you answer biological questions? Well, that's the job of science and scientists. And so in my mind, I began to think about this. Now, there weren't a lot of resources for introductory aging biology for 6 or 7 year olds in that period. Still aren't. What there was, though, was a healthy amount of speculative fiction or science fiction. Things like shows like Star Trek, where they actually treated the concept of longevity being vastly increased, or lifespan increased. Doctor Who, Lost in Space, many other TV shows. And in fact, science fiction authors had been speculating about a radical extension of human lifespan for many decades by the time I first read my early stories about lifespan extension. And so I got my hands on as many of these books as I could, which were very good at exploring the potential sort of ramifications of what happens to society with increased lifespan. What happens to individual careers with radically increased lifespan? Does the world run out of food with increased lifespan? And so forth and so forth. All of these issues really had been dealt with very effectively by the science fiction authors, which I read. And I used to keep a list of science fiction books which had as their focus lifespan extension. I stopped when I got to about 40 or 50 books, because there's just so many stories speculating about this somewhat, extremely attractive concept of never growing old and preserving your youth for vast periods of time and so forth. This really affected me when I was a young boy. And I made it my mission to begin to chart a career following that trajectory of science, investigating the biology of aging, trying to develop methods or knowledge which would be useful in slowing the functional decline of aging. And so I went to university, got a science degree in human genetics, which was followed fairly closely by a higher degree, a PhD in biochemistry at the University of London. And around this time, which was in the early 90s, I began to sort of cast around to further my training, because, once you have your PhD, you're not done. You still need more training and more development. And I went to the University of Cambridge, and I was asking various experts there about, well, how do you find out, where some promising research in the biology of aging is, particularly about manipulating lifespan. And I found through a variety of methods. There was one laboratory in the United States, actually in the University of Colorado at Boulder, where the investigator, a man called Thomas Johnson, had been manipulating the genes of a small nematode worm, Caenorhabditis elegans, the common roundworm, and had been able to extend its lifespan by manipulating a single gene. Now, this at the time was kind of heretical, and I got that kind of response when I asked about going to this scientist's lab for further training. I went to a very esteemed geneticist at the University of Cambridge, and I said, what do you think about going to Tom Johnson's lab in the University of Colorado at Boulder and do postdoctoral studies there? Because I'm fascinated by the studies which he has been publishing, showing that you can manipulate aging and that you can extend lifespan through genetics. Now, this expert said to me, don't waste your time. Don't go there. It'll throw your career away. Nobody believes those studies. It is, everyone knows that aging is just like random stuff and it just happens. And, you can't manipulate it with genetics. So go do a serious project in another lab, which will further your career. Don't throw your career away. So like any good young scientist, I completely disregarded that expert opinion and went to Tom Johnson and approached him about studying the science in his lab of lifespan extension. And he agreed to take me on, luckily for me. And so I went to Tom's lab, and that's where I met the co-founder of Gerostate Alpha, Gordon Lithgow, who you've already heard from in this video series. Gordon was already studying there. He'd been there about 6 months, and together we began to sort of chart a course of furthering our understanding of the biology of aging through manipulating genetics in these simple model systems. Now, at the time, these discoveries and this whole thrust of research was regarded very skeptically within the scientific community. There wasn't a lot of, shall I say, rewards for doing that kind of work. It was considered very risky, potentially uninteresting, and career killing. But as time went on and the decades passed and we accrued more and more knowledge and information about how to manipulate lifespan, about not just manipulating genes, but trying out candidate pharmaceuticals for lifespan extension and slowing functional decline associated with aging, and potentially rescuing late life disease, aging became a hotter and hotter topic. Now, fast forward a few years, and I joined the faculty at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, which is where I'm speaking to you from now. And it's where Gerostate Alpha is incubating. We began to routinely manipulate lifespan, not just of worms or flies or yeast, but actually of mice. So we can very easily now extend the lifespan of mice through pharmaceutical methodology, through genetic methodology, and increasingly we're able to show that not only can we extend lifespan, but we can show that health span is improved through a variety of different technologies. And so throughout the 2000s, we have been engaged in a de-risking practice, if you like, of trying out new methodologies, new experiments, new paradigms for discovering new methods for improving lifespan, improving function. And we've been checking the boxes as we improve these technologies. And slowly but surely, we have built up a considerable body of knowledge within Gerostate Alpha. The founders of Gerostate Alpha, which is Gordon, Mark, and myself, for evaluating candidate molecules for lifespan extension, for determining how likely they are to be effective in slowing central processes of aging, potentially even affecting late life disease. All of these techniques and methods have been percolating in our brains for the last few decades. And ultimately, this led to the formation of Gerostate Alpha and the idea that within a commercial entity, we could accelerate and advance these ideas much faster than we could do in traditional academia. And so that's what's different about Gerostate Alpha. We're experts in this field. We have been in this field since the very beginning. We know where a lot of the failed approaches are. We have developed new approaches and new technologies within Gerostate Alpha, which allow us to try new molecules for slowing aging and extending lifespan, and then discarding the ones which don't work early for a variety of different reasons. And slowly but surely building up a portfolio of molecules which we want to advance ultimately into clinical trials into human beings. And so we have this bedrock of expertise. We have developed new technologies which enable Gerostate Alpha to really accelerate the search and the identification of therapeutics which might be useful in humans. Now, there are no guarantees. We are a moonshot company. I think I take that back. We're more than a moonshot. We're like a star shot company, maybe a galaxy shot company. There's a very small chance that we're going to be successful. But if we are successful, that is a $3 to $5 trillion market, which affects the entire globe. There is not anyone on Earth who will not want to take medicines to slow aging. Spoiler alert, aging is no fun. There are some advantages to getting older, mostly accrual of life experience and wisdom, but the physical side of it leaves a lot to be desired. And I think anyone who is over the age of 35 or 40 would probably agree with that. And in fact, it was quite funny when I was early in my career, in my 20s, and discussing the prospect of lifespan extension at parties and things like that. Sometimes people would think that it would be great to be like 85 or 90. Now, you can be in great health at 85 or 90, but compared to what you are at 30, there's a big difference. And I think most people, as long as they have their health, are going to be reasonably happy. But once their health starts to decline, then their quality of life starts to suffer. And it would be fantastic to have therapeutics to fix that problem. And that's what we're about. So that's all I've got for you today. And I'd be happy to discuss further in the thread which this video is attached to. So thank you for your attention and see you soon.